Welcome back to my channel.
My name is Celia Bradford. I am 29 years old, and the day I got married was the day my family decided I no longer belonged to them. They did not scream. They did not beg me to change my mind. That would have made them seem human. Instead, they stood there with the cold composure of people protecting an empire, not a daughter. My mother told me there would be no trust fund, no inheritance, no place for me in the Bradford family if I married Adrian Knox. My father made it even simpler. If I chose him, I lost everything. My brother looked almost pleased, like he had been waiting for the moment I would finally fall far enough for everyone to see it. They all thought I was throwing my life away on a man who had nothing they respected. No famous last name, no polished pedigree, no place at their table. Just a quiet man they dismissed too quickly and judged far too easily. But Adrian never looked shaken. Even at our wedding, even with my family watching like they were attending the public burial of my future, he just took my hand and smiled. Then he said something I did not fully understand until much later. He told me to let them keep it, because we were going to be more than fine. At the time, I thought he was trying to comfort me. 1 month later, I realized he had been telling me the truth. Because the same parents who cut me off for marrying a man they thought had nothing turned pale when they discovered who my husband really was. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from and what the weather is like there. I just want to know how far my story can travel. 8 months before that wedding, I was sitting at my parents' Sunday brunch table pretending I still belonged there. In my family, brunch was never really brunch. It was a weekly performance with polished silver, perfect flowers, and conversations that sounded casual until you realized every sentence was about money, influence, or who was useful to know. My father liked to review deals between courses. My mother liked to mention guest lists, charity boards, and which families were rising or falling. My brother usually added a few smug comments just to remind everyone he thought he was already the natural heir to everything. I had spent most of my adult life learning how to sit there, smile at the right moments, and act like none of it exhausted me. By 29, I had become very good at looking calm while feeling nothing close to it. The truth was, I had already met the one person who made that whole world feel small. I met Adrian Knox on a Wednesday afternoon I was not supposed to have free. I had left a branding meeting for one of my father's luxury hotel projects with a headache so bad I could barely think. He had dismissed 3 weeks of my work in less than 5 minutes, then handed my ideas to a senior consultant as if they had never belonged to me. I remember walking out of that glass conference room feeling like I could not breathe. Instead of going back to the office, I drove without thinking and ended up in an older part of the city where restored warehouses sat beside family-owned cafes and little shops that did not care who your parents were. That was where I saw him for the first time. He was outside a workshop, sanding down the edge of an old wooden table with the kind of focus that made everything around him disappear. The place looked nothing like the polished showrooms my mother loved. There was sawdust in the air, music playing low from somewhere inside, and sunlight hitting rows of half-restored chairs, cabinets, and doors that looked like they had each survived a different life. I should have kept walking, but there was something about the way he worked that made me stop. He noticed me standing there and asked if I needed help. No sales voice, no fake charm, just a simple question. I told him I was only looking. He nodded like that answer was enough. A few seconds later, I asked how he could tell which pieces were worth saving. He looked down at the table, ran his hand over the grain, and said that sometimes people threw things away because they only knew how to value what looked new. That line stayed with me. I do not think he meant it to sound profound, but it landed harder than anything I had heard in months. I stayed longer than I meant to. We talked about old buildings, local businesses, and why handcrafted things felt more honest than most luxury brands. He never asked my last name. He never asked what my parents did. He did not study my clothes or my watch or the car I had parked down the street. He just talked to me like I was a person who had wandered into his day and not a Bradford with a resume attached to her face. That alone felt dangerous. I went back the next week, pretending I had a reason. Then I went back again. Sometimes I brought coffee. Sometimes I sat on an overturned crate near the open bay door while he worked on a dresser or a carved headboard or some old dining chair. Another person with money had decided was no longer fashionable enough to keep. He told me he loved restoration because it required patience, discipline, and respect for what something had been before it broke. I did not tell him then how much I understood that. Adrian lived simply, or at least that was what I believed. He had a workshop, rough hands, a calm voice, and a way of listening that made me hear myself more clearly. He did not rush me, impress me, or chase me. He just made space for me to be honest. That was new for me. I found myself telling him things I had never said out loud, like how tired I was of being managed, how every accomplishment in my parents' world came with conditions, and how I sometimes felt like my life had already been designed by people who called it love. He never interrupted. He never turned my words into advice. He just listened. And when he finally spoke, he said I sounded like someone who had spent too long living for an audience. No one had ever described me more accurately. By the time I brought him to a small dinner downtown and realized I was watching his face more than the menu, I knew my life had already started to change. The problem was not falling in love with Adrian Knox. The problem was knowing exactly what my family would do when they found out. And I was about to tell them anyway. I told my family about Adrian the following Sunday, and the room changed so fast it felt like the air had gone cold. My parents were hosting one of their usual brunches, the kind where every detail looked effortless because someone else had done the work behind the scenes. My mother had flowers arranged perfectly down the table. My father kept checking his phone between bites. Wesley wore that bored expression he liked to use when he wanted everyone to think he was above the room while living for its approval. I waited until the first plates were cleared because if I did not say it quickly, I might lose my nerve. I told them there was someone in my life. My mother smiled at first, the polite smile she used before deciding whether something was socially useful or embarrassing. My father asked what family he came from. I said his name was Adrian Knox. He repeated it once, clearly not recognizing it, then asked who his people were. I told him Adrian owned a restoration workshop and worked with reclaimed wood and antique interiors. Wesley let out a short laugh. My mother set down her fork with slow, careful control. I told them I was serious. I told them I loved him. I told them we were getting married. That was when my mother looked at me and said there would be no trust fund, no inheritance, no place for me in the family if I went through with it. My father made it simpler. If you choose him, you lose all of this. Wesley smirked and asked if I was really prepared to ruin my future for a man who repaired old furniture for a living. I looked at all three of them and realized they had not asked me one thing about Adrian as a person. Not whether he was kind, not whether he respected me, not whether I was happy, only what he owned, where he came from, and how ashamed they should feel. I told them none of that mattered to me. My father said that was because I had never lived with consequences. My mother said love sounded romantic until the bills came. Wesley said I would crawl back before the wedding gifts were opened. I was hurt, but not surprised. Some part of me had always known this was how my family loved, through leverage, conditions, and rewards for obedience. What I had not expected was how fast they moved when they realized I would not back down. 3 days later, my father called me into his office. A folder sat on his desk with Adrian's name printed across the front. He had already paid to have him investigated. The report was exactly what they wanted. A modest business. No influential family. No society connections. No public profile impressive enough to force their respect. My father tapped the folder and asked if this was really the man I planned to marry. I said yes. He asked if I had lost perspective. I asked if he had ever once cared what I wanted from my own life. He said wanting had nothing to do with it. That answer told me everything. My mother took a different approach. She came to my apartment 2 nights later carrying concern like it was a gift. She told me I was overwhelmed, that women confused relief with love, that I had been raised for more than a hard life with a man who worked with his hands. Then she made her offer. End it now. Come home quietly, and all of this can disappear. No scandal. No rupture. No permanent damage. I told her there was nothing to undo. She looked at me for a long moment and said I would regret making her choose between me and the family's future. She said it as if those two things had never been the same. After that, the pressure stopped being private. My cards linked to family accounts stopped working. Reservations were canceled. People at work began cutting me out of meetings. Projects I had built were reassigned. By the end of the week, I was told my position was being restructured. No one said my father's name, but they did not need to. It was all him. Every silence, every closed door, every person suddenly too busy to look me in the eye. The social fallout came just as fast. Women who had known me since school sent careful messages full of distance and apology. A few did not even pretend. One said her family could not be seen taking sides against the Bradfords. Wesley seemed to enjoy all of it. He posted a photo from a rooftop party with some smug line about standards. He never used my name, but he did not have to. I was becoming a lesson in my own world. Through all of it, Adrian never panicked. He never ranted about my parents or told me what to do. He just stayed steady while everything around me shifted. One night, after another humiliating day, I drove to his workshop and found him closing up. He took one look at me and knew. I asked what would happen if my family really meant it. If they cut me off, destroyed my career, and made sure every door closed. He told me the only door that mattered was the one I chose to walk through. Then he took my hands and said if I stayed, it had to be because I chose him freely, not because I wanted to prove something to them. And if I left, he would still want me safe, even if it was without him. That should have made it easier to walk away. Instead, it made me love him more. A week later, my father made one last attempt. He asked me to come to the house alone. In his study, a check was already waiting on the desk. The amount was large enough to solve almost any problem money could solve. He told me I could still end this quietly, disappear for a while, and return when I was ready to act like a Bradford again. I stared at that check and understood something clearly for the first time. My family had never believed they needed to know me because they were certain they could always buy the ending they wanted. I pushed it back toward him and told him I was marrying Adrian. My father's face turned cold. Then you will leave this family with nothing, he said. I stood up and told him that if everything I had depended on betraying the person I loved, then maybe it had never really belonged to me at all. When I walked out of that room, I was shaking. But underneath the fear, something else had begun to form. Not peace, not confidence. Just the first hard edge of freedom. Our wedding was supposed to be the one part of my life my family could not touch. Adrian and I had chosen a restored glass venue near the river, warm lights, exposed brick, old steel beams, and none of the polished excess my parents would have wanted. We kept it small on purpose. A few loyal friends, a few people from Adrian's side, no society press, no powerful families, no one invited for appearances. I wanted one day that belonged to us. For a few hours I thought I might actually get it. That morning felt almost peaceful. Kelsey helped me get ready upstairs, and for the first time in months I felt calm. My mother had not called. My father had not sent another warning. Wesley had not posted anything cruel. I took that silence for grace, when I should have taken it for strategy. Then I saw Adrian waiting at the end of the aisle, steady and sure. And for a little while, nothing else mattered. The ceremony was simple, and that was exactly why it felt real. No performance, no bargaining, no pretending that love was some kind of business arrangement. When the officiant pronounced us married, I had one brief, perfect moment where everything felt safe. Then I turned toward the reception and saw my family standing there with an audience. They had not come alone. My parents had brought people from our world, investors, social climbers, old family connections, the kind of guests who never attend anything unless there is status to gain or scandal to watch. My father stood near the center of the room like he owned the building. My mother looked composed and injured, as if she were the one enduring humiliation. Wesley leaned against the bar wearing that smug expression I had grown up hating. I stopped cold. My father smiled and said he would not have missed his daughter's wedding. Then he added that a Bradford wedding should be witnessed properly. That was when I understood. He had not come to support me. He had come to make an example of me. The reception moved forward because there was nothing else to do. Dinner was served, music played, and everyone pretended this was normal. But the room felt tight, like it was waiting for a match to hit the floor. Adrian stayed calm through all of it. He thanked guests, spoke politely, and never once looked rattled. I kept waiting for him to ask if I wanted to leave, but he seemed to be watching everything with a patience I did not understand. After dinner, I stood to thank the guests who had actually come for us. I barely started before I heard the sharp tap of a spoon against crystal. My father rose with a champagne glass in his hand, and the room went silent. He said he wanted to make a toast. He spoke the way powerful men always do when they want to humiliate someone in public without appearing cruel. He wrapped it in words like family, legacy, and standards. Then he turned to me and said that because I had chosen this marriage against his wishes, I would receive nothing from him. No trust, no inheritance, no future in anything connected to the Bradford name. He said I had made my choice, and now I would live with it. My mother sat there perfectly still. Wesley finally let his smirk show. Then my father looked at Adrian and said I had thrown my future away on a man with nothing to offer me. He called him ordinary in the coldest way possible. He said love sounded noble at a wedding, but reality would come for us soon enough. For 1 second, I could not breathe. The whole room was watching, waiting to see whether I would fall apart. Instead, Adrian turned to me like no one else existed. He took my hand, smiled, and said clearly, "Let them keep it. We are more than fine." He did not sound wounded or defensive. He sounded certain. My father laughed, but I saw something flicker in his face. Unease. I do not remember deciding to speak. I only remember knowing I could not stay silent. I turned to the room and said that if belonging to my family meant measuring people by money and status, then maybe I had been standing in the wrong place my whole life. I said Adrian was the first person who had ever loved me without asking what my name could do for him. And if that cost me everything my parents had promised, then it was never really mine to begin with. No one moved. No one interrupted. Even the people who had come to watch me break looked uncertain now. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked at me as if I had become a stranger. Wesley rolled his eyes, but he did not laugh again. The rest of the evening split in two. My family and the people who fed off their approval sat in cold silence. Our real guests stayed with us. They hugged me, shook Adrian's hand, and made the room feel human again. My father left first. My mother followed. Wesley gave me one last satisfied look and went after them. When the doors closed behind all three of them, the air changed. It still hurt, but at least it was ours. Later that night, when the music had softened and most of the room had emptied, I asked Adrian how he had stayed so calm while my family tried to strip my life away in front of strangers. He touched my face and said my father thought he had taken everything that mattered. But he was wrong. At the time, I thought he was comforting me. A month later, I would learn he had been telling me the truth. The first month of marriage looked nothing like the life my family had always told me I was supposed to want, and that was exactly why it started to feel real. Our apartment was small, imperfect, and completely ours. The kitchen was cramped, the radiator made noise at night, and nothing in that space had been chosen to impress anyone. But for the first time in my life, I was living somewhere that did not feel like a performance. Adrian moved through that apartment with an ease I envied. He made coffee before I woke up, kept everything steady, and somehow knew when I needed comfort and when I needed silence. I wish I could say I adjusted quickly, but I did not. My family had cut me off so completely that even ordinary things felt new to me. Grocery bills, utility payments, job applications, every part of adult life suddenly felt sharper without the safety net I had been raised inside. I started applying for work almost immediately, telling myself that if I could build something on my own, maybe I had not ruined my future. But the rejections came fast. Some firms ignored me. Others seemed interested until they learned exactly who I was. My father never had to call them directly. His influence moved ahead of me. After another rejection, I sat in the dark with my laptop closed and felt the weight of everything I had lost. Adrian came home, sat beside me, and asked me what I wanted, not what was realistic. That question stayed with me. I told him I wanted to build something of my own, something honest and completely separate from my family's name. He told me to do exactly that. I laughed at first because we did not seem to have the luxury for bold dreams, but Adrian spoke with a confidence I did not fully understand. That was when I started noticing the cracks in the life he had shown me. He still worked at the shop, still came home with sawdust on his clothes, but there were things that did not add up. He took late-night calls and used words that sounded more like boardrooms than workshops. Sometimes I heard him mention forecasts, compliance, acquisitions, things no furniture restorer should have been discussing at midnight. Once, a black car stopped outside the shop, and a sharply dressed man waited inside as if he had come for a meeting, not a repair. Another time, an older man named Martin visited and spoke to Adrian with the kind of respect I had only seen powerful men give to people they answered to. I also noticed how much Adrian knew about industries far beyond his own. When I mentioned that my father was chasing a major infrastructure deal, Adrian's reaction was too calm, too informed, too knowing. It was not just that he understood the business world, it was that he sounded like he belonged in it. Around the same time, my mother called for the first time since the wedding. She asked if I was settling in, then smoothly suggested my father was still willing to help if I came to my senses. I looked around our small apartment while she spoke, and realized something important. My life was harder now, yes, but it was honest. I told her I was exactly where I wanted to be. After I hung up, I went back to the notebook where I had been sketching ideas for a small branding business for local makers and independent businesses. For the first time, I stopped waiting for permission. Adrian came home, looked at my notes, and asked if I had finally decided. I told him I was done begging to be hired. I was going to build something myself, even if it started at our kitchen table. He looked at me with that same quiet certainty and said small was fine, as long as it was mine. Later that week, while he was in the shower, his phone lit up beside me with a calendar alert that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Executive briefing, North Corridor announcement. I stared at the words until the screen went dark. When Adrian came back into the room, I said nothing. Not because I was not curious, but because I was beginning to understand that my husband was carrying a truth much larger than the life he had shown me. By the end of that month, I landed my first real client for my new business and sat at the kitchen table holding the signed contract like proof that I could still build a future with my own hands. Adrian opened a bottle of wine and told me this was only the beginning. I thought he meant my business. I would soon learn he meant everything. 1 month after our wedding, Adrian told me to clear my schedule for Thursday night and wear something formal. He did not explain much beyond that. He only said there was an event downtown and that he wanted me there with him. By then, I had already stopped pretending his life was as simple as he had first let me believe. But I still did not know how large the truth really was. I chose a black dress, kept my makeup simple, and told myself not to expect answers I might not be ready to hear. The event was being held at one of the biggest conference venues in the city, the kind of place my father loved because it was always full of cameras, investors, and people trying to look more important than they were. The moment our car pulled up, I knew this was no ordinary industry dinner. Security was tight. The lobby was packed with executives, reporters, policy people, and enough money to reshape a skyline. Adrian stepped out beside me as calmly as ever, and what unsettled me most was not that he looked comfortable there. It was that he looked expected. People noticed him immediately, not in the curious way strangers look at an attractive couple, but in the sharp, respectful way people react when someone powerful has arrived. A few men nodded at him before we even reached the entrance. A woman in a tailored navy suit greeted him by name and said the board was already inside. The board. I looked at Adrian, but he only offered me that same unreadable calm and guided me forward with one hand at my back. Then I saw my family. My father, mother, and Wesley were standing near the front of the hall, dressed like they were walking into a victory. My father had been chasing a major infrastructure partnership for weeks, maybe months, and from the way he held himself, he clearly believed that night would bring him closer to it. He saw me first. The surprise on his face hardened almost instantly into contempt. My mother's mouth tightened. Wesley looked amused, like he thought I had shown up just to prove I was still desperate to stand near power. My father walked over and asked what exactly I thought I was doing there. Before I could answer, he looked at Adrian and gave him a thin smile that was more insult than greeting. He said events like this were not for spectators. Adrian did not react. He only looked at my father and said, very quietly, "Then it is a good thing I am not here to watch." I felt something cold move down my spine. Before I could ask what he meant, the lights in the hall dimmed and everyone began taking their seats. A giant screen at the front lit up with the logo of the company hosting the night, the same private firm my father had been desperate to impress. The room settled. The presenter stepped on stage and began introducing the keynote speaker, the founder and chief executive behind the company's newest expansion. Even then, Even with the room going still around me, I did not put the pieces together fast enough. The presenter spoke about vision, national growth, new infrastructure, and a leader who had spent years building quietly while everyone else chased headlines. Then she said his name, Adrian Knox. For 1 second, the entire room seemed to stop breathing with me. Adrian let go of my hand and stepped forward. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. My husband, the man my parents had dismissed as ordinary, walked toward the stage while the entire hall rose to its feet. Not politely, not out of obligation. They stood because they knew exactly who he was. His face appeared on the screens above the crowd beside his title, and the company name my father had been chasing for months. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. I looked at my father, and the color had completely drained from his face. My mother looked like she had forgotten how to blink. Wesley was no longer smirking. He was staring. Adrian reached the stage, thanked the audience, and began speaking with the same calm confidence he carried everywhere, except now there was no hiding the scale of it. He spoke about expansion, long-term value, responsibility, and building things that last. The whole time, I barely heard a word because I was too busy understanding everything at once. The late calls, the black cars, the respect, the certainty. The way he had stood at our wedding like my father's threats meant nothing. He had known exactly who he was all along. He had just never needed anyone else to know. When the speech ended, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. Adrian stepped down from the stage and came straight toward me first, not toward investors, not toward cameras, toward me. He took my hand again, and in that moment my father finally moved. He looked at Adrian with the expression of a man trying to recover from public humiliation before anyone noticed he was bleeding. His voice came out tight as he said they should talk. Adrian faced him with perfect composure. Then he said the line my father deserved to hear in front of everyone who mattered. The only thing that changed tonight was your understanding of my value. My father stood there in stunned silence, because for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The fallout hit my family faster than even I expected. By the next morning, people in their world already knew what had happened. The same guests who had watched my father cut me off at my wedding were now whispering about the fact that the man he had mocked in public was the one holding the power he had been chasing in private. My father tried to recover quickly, of course. He reached out through assistance first, then through mutual contacts, then finally on his own. My mother called twice in one day, speaking in that soft, careful voice she used when she wanted to rewrite history without admitting what she had done. Wesley even showed up pretending he wanted to clear the air, but it did not take long to understand that none of them were there because they suddenly respected me. They were there because the balance had changed, and for the first time, they were no longer the ones controlling the room. Adrian saw through all of it immediately. He did not humiliate them. He did not raise his voice. He simply refused to reward cruelty just because it had become inconvenient for them. As for me, I did not want revenge nearly as much as I thought I would. What I wanted was distance, honesty, and the right to live without being measured by my usefulness. So I told my family the truth they had spent years avoiding. I had not been happy because of money, status, or the Bradford name. I was happy because I had finally chosen a life where love did not come with conditions. I told them that if they wanted any place in my future, it would not be as judges, and it would never again be as owners of my choices. Some apologies come too late to fix what they broke, but they can still reveal who people really are. My parents taught me that wealth can make people feel powerful enough to confuse control with love. Adrian taught me something better. Real worth does not rise and fall with money, family approval, or public status. It lives in character, in loyalty, and in the people who stand beside you when there is nothing to gain. I lost an inheritance, but I found something far more valuable. I found a life that was actually mine. And if there is one lesson in all of this, it is that the people who judge your value by what you seem to have will always miss who you truly are until it is too late. The Revenge Mangan team is committed to creating meaningful and engaging stories that entertain while sharing positive lessons with viewers. We want to make it clear that this story is entirely fictional and is created to deliver educational messages, life lessons, and thoughtful storytelling. Celia handled the situation with strength, dignity, and self-respect, instead of letting pain turn her bitter. She chose love, honesty, and healthy boundaries, which made her response even more powerful. If you were in her position, how would you handle your family, and would you make the same choice she did?